SpaceX just had the biggest IPO in history, and rockets had nothing to do with it. On June 12, 2026, SpaceX became a publicly traded company. The IPO raised approximately $75 billion, the largest in history. Shares opened at $150, pushing the company's valuation above $2 trillion and making Elon Musk the world's first trillionaire. Here is what should genuinely surprise you. None of that money is really about rockets. Buried inside SpaceX's IPO filing is a business deal so large it generates more monthly revenue than the company's entire rocket launch business and its Starlink satellite network combined. And it has nothing to do with space travel in the traditional sense. It is about artificial intelligence, data centers, and a plan that, if it works, leads somewhere nobody expected: the moon. Not as a destination, as a factory. This is the story of how SpaceX quietly became one of the most important AI companies on Earth, why that was the plan all along, and how it connects directly to humanity finally building something permanent beyond this planet. For most of the history of space exploration, there has been one fundamental problem. None of it makes money. Government space programs are funded by taxpayers, and taxpayer-funded programs follow political cycles rather than scientific ones. The Apollo program landed humans on the moon in 1969, and by the early 1970s, public interest and political will had evaporated. The program was canceled. We did not return to the moon for over 50 years. NASA's current Artemis program, aiming to return humans to the moon this decade, faces the exact same structural risk. It is an extraordinary scientific achievement in progress, but there is no profit motive driving it. It depends entirely on sustained government funding, and history shows that kind of funding rarely survives changes in political priorities. NASA's Administrator Jared Isaacman has stated this directly: the long-term future of space exploration cannot be funded by taxpayers alone. It is not sustainable. What space exploration actually needs is something that has never existed before: a genuine economic reason for going. Not flags, not footprints, profit. And the path SpaceX has found toward that profit starts somewhere nobody expected. In February 2026, Elon Musk merged two of his companies. His oldest, SpaceX, and his youngest, xAI, the company behind the Grok AI model. On paper, this looked like a corporate restructuring. Shares of xAI converted into shares of SpaceX. But what actually moved under SpaceX's control was something far more valuable than an AI chatbot. Two of the most advanced data centers on the planet, Colossus 1 and Colossus 2, massive facilities in Memphis, Tennessee, originally built to train Grok, each representing billions of dollars of investment in computing infrastructure. And then SpaceX did something that turned those data centers from a cost center into one of the most valuable assets the company owns. Grok's commercial struggles had left these data centers running at only a small fraction of their total capacity, meaning the vast majority of this enormously expensive infrastructure was sitting idle. SpaceX started renting it out. In May 2026, a major AI lab agreed to pay over $1 billion per month for the entire output of one of these data centers, with the contract running through 2029. Soon after, another major technology company signed its own deal worth hundreds of millions of dollars per month for access to a large allocation of advanced processing chips. The first of these deals alone is worth tens of billions of dollars over its full term, equivalent to roughly $15 billion per year. For context, SpaceX's entire annual revenue from everything else, including rockets and Starlink, sits at around $18 billion per year. One single AI compute deal is worth nearly as much as the entire rest of the company combined. When companies go public, investors are not paying for what a company has already accomplished. They are paying for what it is projected to become. SpaceX's IPO filing reportedly projects a total addressable market, meaning the total potential revenue opportunity across all of its business lines, of approximately $28.5 trillion. Without artificial intelligence as part of the business, that number collapses to roughly $2 trillion. Still enormous for a normal company, but nowhere near enough to justify becoming the largest IPO in Wall Street history, and nowhere near enough to fund something like a self-sustaining city on Mars. The AI business is what makes the rest of the vision financially possible. And the plan for how that AI business scales is where this story becomes genuinely strange. Renting out 2 data centers worth billions of dollars per month sounds like the easiest business model in the world. Just build more, right? Here's the problem. Data centers consume enormous amounts of electricity and require enormous amounts of water for cooling. They generate heat, noise, and infrastructure demands that make them deeply unwelcome neighbors. Communities increasingly resist new data center construction near where people live. Scaling this business on Earth runs directly into a wall of energy constraints and local opposition. SpaceX's proposed solution is as audacious as anything the company has ever attempted. Move the data centers into space. Not as a metaphor. Literally, satellites functioning as orbital data centers. Picture something similar to a Starlink satellite, but built around a rack of processing chips instead of internet communication equipment, with a massive solar panel array for constant power and large radiators for cooling. Placed in an orbit high enough to remain in constant sunlight, these satellites would never experience darkness, providing uninterrupted solar power around the clock. Networked together using the same high-speed laser communication links that connect Starlink satellites, they would form what is essentially a computing layer in orbit, sitting above the existing Starlink internet layer. No electricity drawn from terrestrial power grids. No water consumption. No communities living next to humming server farms. Just satellites, sunlight, and the vacuum of space serving as the ultimate cooling system. The concept solves the energy and environmental problem completely, but it creates an entirely new problem of staggering scale. To make orbital data centers actually competitive with anything on Earth, you do not need a handful of satellites. You need thousands, likely tens of thousands. Elon Musk has previously discussed Starlink scaling toward 1 million satellites in total, and an orbital AI compute layer would need to scale alongside it. Getting that much mass into orbit using current rockets is not realistic. Even SpaceX's workhorse Falcon 9, the most flown orbital rocket in history, can only carry around 20 of the newer, heavier Starlink satellites per launch. This is where Starship enters the picture, and why Starship may end up being the single most important vehicle SpaceX has ever built, for reasons that have nothing to do with its original purpose. To deploy an orbital data center network at the scale this business model requires, Starship would need to launch, deliver its payload, return, get reloaded, and launch again, repeatedly, every single day, from multiple launch sites simultaneously. An operational tempo that has never existed in the history of spaceflight. And launching that many rockets that frequently creates its own environmental and logistical problems on Earth. The very problem this entire plan was supposed to avoid in the first place. Which leads to the part of this plan that sounds the most like science fiction. Except it is in SpaceX's actual filed business projections. If launching everything from Earth eventually becomes the bottleneck, the solution is to stop launching everything from Earth. The moon contains substantial deposits of metals, iron, titanium, aluminum, magnesium, the exact raw materials needed to manufacture satellites and the data center hardware they would carry. If SpaceX could build a manufacturing facility on the lunar surface using lunar resources, 2 enormous problems disappear simultaneously. Earth's resources are not depleted to build this infrastructure, and rockets are not needed to launch the finished satellites from Earth's surface, because they are already in space. This connects directly to NASA's Artemis program and the broader plan to build a permanent lunar base. Starship, developed as a lunar lander to help NASA put astronauts back on the moon, also gives SpaceX the exact infrastructure needed to begin building this orbital manufacturing operation. There is research already supporting why manufacturing in space could actually produce a superior product. Experiments aboard the International Space Station have shown that pharmaceutical compounds, semiconductors, fiber optics, and 3D printed materials can come out with fewer defects when manufactured outside Earth's gravity. Because even the small pull of gravity on Earth introduces imperfections during certain manufacturing processes that simply do not occur in microgravity. The moon is not zero gravity. It sits at roughly 1/6 of Earth's gravity, but that is still dramatically lower than Earth, potentially allowing higher quality manufacturing than anything achievable on our planet's surface. And then there is the detail that sounds the most like something out of a novel. To get manufactured satellites off the lunar surface and into orbit without using rockets at all, SpaceX has discussed building what is called a mass driver, essentially a long magnetic track that accelerates objects to extremely high speeds using electromagnetic force rather than combustion. If an object reaches a velocity of roughly 8,560 kilometers per hour from the moon's surface, it would be moving fast enough to escape the moon's gravity entirely and fly directly into space. No fuel, no rocket, no launch pad. A company built on rockets, eliminating rockets from the majority of its own operations. Here is the connection that makes this entire story matter beyond SpaceX's stock price. Every piece of this plan, the orbital data centers, the lunar manufacturing facility, the mass driver, exists for one purpose: to generate enough revenue to fund what SpaceX has always said was the actual goal: a self-sustaining city on Mars. For decades, that goal sounded like a slogan, a mission statement printed on a website with no realistic financial path behind it. Colonizing another planet costs an amount of money that simply does not exist within the budget of any government space agency, let alone a private company funded by rocket launches alone. But an artificial intelligence economy generating tens of trillions of dollars, that is a number large enough to actually fund something like Mars. This is the mechanism Jared Isaacman was describing when he said space exploration needs to become profitable, not exploration for its own sake. A genuine industry, artificial intelligence, that happens to work better in space than on Earth, that happens to require manufacturing infrastructure that works better on the moon than on Earth, and that happens to generate exactly the kind of capital required to eventually fund a permanent human presence on another planet. SpaceX's IPO this past week was not really about rockets. It was the financial starting gun for a plan that, if even partially successful, leads to humans living and working on the moon, manufacturing AI infrastructure that orbits the Earth, all funded by a business that did not exist 18 months ago. The company that built its reputation launching things into space may end up best known for the thing it eventually stopped needing to launch at all. Mars was always the destination. It turns out the path there runs through a server farm in Memphis, a factory on the moon, and an IPO that just became the largest in Wall Street history.